Chapter 1. The Night Visitor. The village of Dunkelbach slept beneath a sky thick with rolling storm clouds, the silver moon barely visible behind their shifting mass. The wind howled through the gnarled branches of the Drackwald trees, whispering secrets only the darkness could understand. The villagers, simple folk of Sturland, had long learned to bar their doors against the horrors of the night, wolves, bandits, and worse. But no lock, no prayer, no blade would save them from what stalked them now. Sreek Vilefang crouched atop the thatched roof of the village's inn, his black-cloaked form blending seamlessly with the shadows. The assassin's beady red eyes flicked from one hovel to the next, his long, wiry tail coiling around his leg as he listened. A lone watchman stood at the village square, barely awake, leaning on his spear. Pathetic man-thing, weak, stupid, Sreek thought. Easy prey. His orders were clear: scout, observe, prepare. The Under-Empire had turned its ravenous gaze toward Dunkelbach, and Sreek was the blade that would carve its path into the depths. A shadow among prey. He had already spent 3 nights in the village, lurking within their walls unseen, his senses drinking in every secret, every routine, every weakness. The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man named Otto Gessner, was the strongest among them, his hammer falling like thunder in the daylight, but leaving him exhausted by dusk. Father Albrecht, the village's priest, was the spiritual heart of Dunkelbach, leading prayers to Sigmar at the shrine at dawn and dusk. And then there was Hagen, the hunter, young, sharp-eyed, and wary. Sreek had noted how the man always checked the forest edge before nightfall, how his grip on his bow never slackened, even in safety. A danger, perhaps, but not for long. A whisper of death. Sreek slithered from the rooftop, his clawed hands gripping the wooden beams with unnatural ease. He descended into the narrow alley behind the baker's shop, where the scent of stale bread mixed with damp earth. The shadows embraced him like an old friend as he moved through the village, his tail flicking behind him. He reached his first target, a small storeroom behind the tavern. His claws worked swiftly, loosening the wooden slats at the back wall just enough for a skein of his size to slip through unnoticed. Soon the others would come. Soon the Under-Empire would reach up and pull Dunkelbach into its maw. His ears twitched. A sound. Boots on the dirt path. The hunter is hunted? Sreek froze. The steps were light, cautious. He turned his head slowly, just in time to see Hagen emerging from the gloom, his bow in hand. The hunter stopped, eyes narrowing at the disturbed earth near the storeroom. Too sharp smart, this one. The assassin flattened himself against the tavern wall, his black cloak swallowing his form in the darkness. He watched as Hagen crouched, brushing his fingers over the claw marks Sreek had left behind. Not good. Not good. The man's head lifted, scanning the alley, his body tensed for danger. He was alert. Sreek would have to be careful. The assassin's 3-clawed hand slowly reached for one of the glass vials at his belt, its contents a noxious green. 1 drop of warp-dew toxin in a man's lungs and he would convulse until his heart burst in his chest. But before Sreek could strike, Hagen stood and muttered something under his breath. Beastmen. Then, just as quickly as he had come, the hunter turned and strode off toward the village's edge, bow slung across his back. Sreek's whiskers twitched in amusement. Good, good. Keep believing that, man-thing. The shadows welcomed him once more as he vanished into the night, his mind already scheming. Soon, the village would belong to the Skaven. They just didn't know it yet. Chapter 2. Whispers in the dark. The sickness began with a whisper. A low murmur in the wind. A fleeting shadow at the edge of vision. A creeping unease that slithered beneath the skin. The people of Dunkelbach woke in the night to the sound of scratching within their walls, a sensation of something watching from the dark corners of their homes. And then came the illness. First, the miller's boy fell sick, shivering and pale, his eyes bloodshot as he raved about voices in the wind. Then the innkeeper's wife, clutching her stomach as a fever raged through her body. By the end of the third day, half the village suffered from retching fits, nightmarish visions, and delirium. All according to plan. A plague without a name. From the rooftops and crawl spaces, Sreek Vile Fang watched, his red eyes gleaming in the gloom as his work took effect. The villagers did not know it yet, but their grain had been tainted, their wells poisoned with a precisely measured mix of warp dew extract and black hunger spores, a combination meant not to kill but to weaken, to confuse, to break their will. The slow hand of death was always more effective than the swift. His tail twitched as he listened to them argue in the marketplace. The seeds of fear. I tell you, it's a curse. The butcher's wife, a stocky woman named Margarita, clutched a rag to her damp forehead, her hands trembling. First the rats swarm the streets, now this. It's the work of witchcraft. Nonsense, Father Albrecht replied, his face drawn and tired. It is simply an illness, no different than any other. No different, she scoffed. Then why do my dreams crawl with skittering things? Why do I wake in the night with the feeling of teeth at my throat? The villagers murmured in agreement, exchanging nervous glances. Whispers of a dark force in the woods, a shadow creeping into their homes, filled the air like the buzzing of flies over a rotting corpse. Sreek grinned. Yes, yes. Good, let the fear spread. He had sown the seeds, and now it was time to watch them rot. The hallucinogenic fog. That night the fog rolled in. Thick, heavy, unnatural. It slithered into the streets, curling around doorsteps, creeping under the gaps of wooden shutters. It was no ordinary mist, Sreek had ensured that. He had spent the last 2 nights planting warp-tainted incense burners beneath the village square, buried beneath the cobblestones, their fumes slowly leaking into the night air. The villagers tossed and turned in their beds, their minds filled with twisted visions. Some saw skittering forms in the corners of their rooms, shifting in and out of sight. Others heard chittering voices, laughing, whispering, calling their names. A few woke up gasping for air, convinced something had been sitting on their chest, pressing down with unseen claws. By dawn, hysteria had taken hold. The panic takes hold. A mother ran screaming into the town square, her child limp in her arms, his body racked with shivers. A blacksmith's apprentice hacked off his own fingers, convinced something was crawling beneath his skin. A group of villagers, torches in hand, gathered at the edge of the woods, swearing they had seen a figure with glowing red eyes watching from the trees. Sreek chuckled from his hiding place beneath the inn's foundation, his clawed fingers tightening around the hilt of his poisoned dagger. They were breaking. The fear was eating them from the inside, festering, growing. By tomorrow, they would turn on one another. And when they did, the Under Empire would take what remained. Chapter 3. Shadows at the Edge. The people of Dunkelbach had always feared the Drackwald forest. It was a place of old evils, where gnarled trees bent like crooked fingers and the wind carried the echoes of unseen voices. But now, something far worse than wolves or bandits lurked within its depths. Something watching, something waiting. The villagers saw them first at dusk, dark figures flitting through the trees at the village outskirts, darting between trunks too quickly to be men. The first sighting came from Rudolph the shepherd, who stumbled into the marketplace, breathless and pale, claiming to have seen shadow things crawling through the mist. Then Gottfried the old trapper swore by Sigmar's hammer that something had knocked over his snares, leaving behind long, clawed footprints in the mud. By the time the sun sank below the trees, hysteria had gripped Dunkelbach. The watchmen doubled their patrols, gripping their spears with white-knuckled hands. Doors were bolted shut, shutters locked tight, and prayers murmured at the village shrine. But no amount of faith would keep the darkness at bay. because the shadows were already inside the village. Eyes in the night. From the high-thatched roofs, nestled in the crumbling eaves of the barns, and lurking within the creaking timbers of the grain store, they watched. They listened. Night runners. Their black-furred bodies melded with the night, their thin, wiry frames perfectly still, only the twitching of whiskers and the gleam of red eyes betraying their presence. They clung to the darkness like leeches to rotting flesh, watching their prey with hungry, eager eyes. From his perch above the village square, Sreek Fang gave a low, guttural chitter, a signal carried on the wind. The night runners twitched in response, claws flexing, tails curling with anticipation. Not yet, not yet, soon. They would strike when the village was weakest, when the fear had curdled into madness, when their prey was too sick, too broken to resist. For now, they would wait. They would let the whispers spread, let the paranoia fester, let the villagers destroy themselves before the true horror began. Pagan's watch. Pagan the hunter did not sleep that night. Perched on the wooden watchtower, bow in hand, he scanned the tree line with narrowed eyes. He had seen them. Not clearly, not yet, but enough to know something unnatural stalked the village. Bandits didn't move like that. Beastmen didn't vanish into thin air. This was something else. Something worse. A gust of wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of damp fur, of something rank and musky. His stomach turned. A shadow shifted at the edge of the woods. Pagan's fingers tightened around the bowstring. There, movement. A shape crouched between the roots of an old oak, barely visible in the gloom, its eyes glowing red like smoldering coals. His breath caught in his throat. Not human. He raised his bow, heart pounding, and then it was gone, vanished, as if the darkness itself had swallowed it whole. A cold sweat ran down his back. They were watching. And whatever they weren't waiting to be found. Chapter 4. The Bell Tolls. The first scream cut through the night like a dagger. A second followed, then a third. By the time the church bell rang, the streets of Dunkelbach were filled with panicked voices, their cries echoing between the timber-framed houses as men and women scrambled from their beds, fumbling for weapons, for their children, for any sense of safety. But there was no safety tonight, because this was not a true attack. This was the performance before the slaughter, and Sreek Fang was its orchestrator. A fire in the dark. Flames licked at the rooftops near the village square, casting long, twisting shadows against the cobbled streets. Figures moved in the smoke, darting between houses, howling like madmen. The illusion of chaos was perfect. The villagers saw ragged silhouettes, the flashing of steel, the gleam of hungry eyes, and they assumed the worst. Bandits. But no bandit moved like this. No outlaw vanished into thin air the moment a torch was turned their way. These were Skaven night runners, their black-cloaked bodies darting between alleyways, striking where the flames burned brightest, making sure the people of Dunkelbach saw just enough to make them believe. The villagers fled toward the church, where Father Albrecht shouted for them to gather, to hold their ground. But Sreek had other plans. This was not an attack meant to kill. Not yet. The flight to the caves. A thunderous crash shook the earth. From the western edge of the village, a wagon of oil barrels had been overturned and set ablaze, its contents erupting in a fiery explosion that sent shrapnel and burning wood across the streets. A calculated distraction. The panicked villagers turned away from the church, their eyes snapping toward the caves beyond the outskirts. "To the caves!" someone screamed. It was exactly what Sreek had wanted. A surge of desperate men, women, and children fled the burning village, pushing toward the dark, yawning mouth of the caves at the tree line, the old silver mine, abandoned for decades, now a trap waiting to be sprung. As they ran, the shadows followed. The night runners faded from the flames, their mission complete. Sreek watched from above, perched atop the church's belfry, his tail flicking with satisfaction. The humans had done exactly as he had predicted, like mice running for the maze. And once they were inside, there would be no way back. The doors close. By the time the last villager scrambled into the cavern's entrance, the village behind them burned, casting the entrance in an eerie glow. Father Albrecht led the survivors deeper, muttering prayers to Sigmar, his hands trembling as he clutched his hammer. Hagen was at his side, his bow gripped tightly, his eyes darting to the ceiling of the cave, his breath shallow. Something was wrong. Something about this place felt unnatural. They weren't safe here. And then, from somewhere deep within the tunnels, a low chittering sound echoed in the dark. The last of the villagers turned to flee, but the cave entrance was gone. The heavy wooden beams that had once supported the mine's entrance collapsed with precision, their supports cut clean through, burying the entrance beneath tons of rock and soil. They were trapped, and somewhere, in the darkness ahead, something was waiting for them. Chapter 5. The Descent. The rock sealed their fate. A dull, suffocating silence followed the collapse of the cave entrance. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the villagers, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, their eyes darting between one another as realization sank in. They were trapped. Beyond the wall of fallen stone, their village still burned, its orange glow flickering through the dust that drifted into the cavern like funeral ash. For many, that was the last they would ever see of Dunkelbach. Their homes, their fields, their entire lives swallowed by the darkness. And the darkness was hungry. The path of the damned. "Move," Father Albrecht said at last, his voice hoarse, his hammer gripped tightly in his hands. "We cannot stay here." "But the way back," Margareta, the butcher's wife, gasped. "There is no way back." Silence followed the words. Then, a chilling gust of air came from the depths of the cavern, carrying with it a scent both earthy and rotten, damp and foul. The air in the tunnel did not sit stale. It breathed. A path lay ahead, and wherever it led, it was not empty. Father Albrecht turned toward Hagen, the young hunter's face barely visible in the gloom. His knuckles were white around the hilt of his knife, his bow slung across his shoulder. "You know the land, boy," the priest muttered. "Can you lead us?" Hagen hesitated. He had hunted these forests since he was old enough to draw a bow, but this was not the forest. This was something else entirely. "I can try," he said. With slow, cautious steps, the villagers began their march into the tunnels, their torches flickering against the jagged walls of wet, glistening stone. And Sreek Vilefang followed, the shadow in the rear. The assassin slunk behind the group, his form melded to the shadows, his whiskers twitching as he watched their fear grow with each passing moment. "Fools! Stupid man-things!" Already the whispers had begun. Soft mutterings between the farmers, the bakers, the woodcutters. Fingers pointing, blame being shared like a curse. "Why did we come here?" one muttered. "We should have fought," another hissed. "They wanted us here," a third whispered. Yes, Sreek thought, his fangs glinting in the darkness. Very true. And yet you walk deeper, deeper still. With each step the villagers descended into the Under-Empire, even if they did not yet know it. But soon they would. First signs of the Under-Empire. The tunnel widened into a vast chamber, its ceiling so high their torches barely reached it. Stalactites hung like the teeth of a great beast, dripping with moisture, the air thick with the scent of mold, rust, and something worse. Something old. Something unnatural. Hagen took a cautious step forward, his boots squelching into something wet. He froze. The others stared at his feet. A long, dark smear stretched across the cavern floor. Not water. Not mud. Blood. dried, blackened blood. The villagers stiffened, their breath held, and then a chittering sound far ahead. Like nails on glass, claws on stone. Something was waiting. Something watching. They were not alone. The puppeteer pulls the strings. From the safety of the darkness, Sreek grinned. They had reached the threshold, the edge of the Under-Empire. He curled his claws around the hilt of his dagger, his tail twitching with anticipation. The humans had no idea what lay ahead. But he did, and soon, so would they. Chapter 6. Deeper and Darker. The deeper they went, the less the caves felt like caves. At first the tunnels had seemed natural, jagged rock, damp walls, the occasional glimmer of moisture catching the torchlight. But now the stone was too smooth, the walls too symmetrical, the air too thick with the scent of something rotten. This was not an abandoned mine. This was something else, something wrong, and Hagen was the first to notice. Carvings in the stone. Hagen slowed his steps, eyes narrowing at the passage ahead. The torches flickered against something etched into the walls, not natural formations, but deliberate carvings. Symbols, twisting, claw-like runes scratched deep into the stone, forming patterns that made his stomach churn. "What is this?" he muttered, brushing his fingers over the marks. "Witchcraft," someone whispered behind him. "No, something worse," Father Albrecht said, his expression grim. "These are not the marks of any man." The air felt heavier here, as if something was pressing down upon them, unseen but watching. And still the stench grew stronger. Not just rot, not just damp. Something musky, bestial, foul, as if the walls themselves had been steeped in decay for centuries. Whispers in the dark. The villagers moved faster, their unease festering into panic. And in the shadows, Sreek Vilefying smiled. Yes, fear, weakness, confusion. He did not need to strike yet, the tunnels were already against them. The twisting paths doubled back on themselves, leading to the same chambers again and again, the markings on the walls becoming more erratic, more frenzied, as if they had been carved in madness. And then the voices began. Soft, faint, just beyond the range of hearing. A whisper in the distance, echoing from nowhere. A laugh. A chittering sound. The villagers staggered to a halt, heads snapping toward the tunnel behind them. But there was nothing there. Just darkness. Deep and endless and hungry. The smell of death. Then came the bodies. Not fresh, not even human. A pile of twisted, desiccated things lay collapsed in a side tunnel, their flesh shriveled, their bones warped. Hagen swallowed hard, his breath caught in his throat as he took a step closer. The corpses were rat-like, but not normal rats. They were too big, their skulls too elongated, their limbs too grotesquely thin, and scrawled across the floor beneath them, carved in shaking claw marks, were words that did not belong to any human tongue. A warning, a plea, or a curse. Hagen took a step back. "We have to go." Father Albrecht nodded grimly. "Yes. Keep moving. Stay together." The villagers hurried on, their steps now faster, heavier, torches gripped too tightly. Behind them the darkness shifted. And Sreek, still unseen, followed. The trap was nearly set. All they had to do was fall deeper. Chapter 7. The First Kill. The darkness was no longer just behind them. It was about them, below them, inside them. Every breath felt thicker, every step heavier, every torch burned lower than it should have. The villagers moved in tight clusters, whispering prayers to Sigmar, as if the mere mention of his name would keep the shadows at bay. But nothing could protect them now. because the Under-Empire had already claimed them, and soon it would feed the fall. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to walk in single file, their torches barely illuminating the path ahead. Hagen took the lead, bow in hand, while Father Albrecht followed close behind, muttering low prayers under his breath. Somewhere in the middle of the group, Margarita and 3 others stumbled over loose stones, cursing under their breath. And at the very back, Skretch Valfang clung to the ceiling beams, his body flattened against the rock like a spider, his red eyes gleaming as he watched them crawl deeper into his web. His whiskers twitched. Yes, yes. Keep going, fools. Keep walking. Just a few more steps. One more step. Then crack. The floor beneath Margarita and her group vanished. A trapdoor of rusted beams and rotted wood, crafted long ago by Skaven claws, gave way, and with a single collective scream, they plunged into the abyss below. The swarm below. Their torches vanished into the chasm, the light swallowed whole by the cavern's depths. For a few agonizing seconds, there was only silence. Then, the screams began, not cries of pain, but of utter, primal horror. Hagen and the others rushed to the edge, peering down into the black pit below. They could see nothing, but they could hear the sound of skittering, of claws on stone, of chittering, ravenous hunger. Then came the wet tearing. The screams turned to shrieks, then to gurgles, then to nothing at all. Hagen staggered back, eyes wide with horror. What was that? Someone whispered. Father Albrecht clutched his hammer, his lips pale. We move, now. Sreek watches, Sreek laughs. Still clinging to the ceiling, Sreek Vilefang grinned. He did not need to see to know what was happening below. He had set the trap himself. A pit filled with starving giant rats, their bellies empty, their minds reduced to nothing but hunger. Now they feasted, and the humans could only listen. Yes, yes, let them hear, let them feel their own weakness. Skreek's tail twitched with glee as he followed them deeper, his claws tapping lightly against the stone. The humans would not turn back now, because the only way out was forward. Chapter 8. Something Watches. The tunnel walls shifted around them. Not physically, no. They still stood firm, wet with condensation and warped with age. But the air had changed. It was thicker, heavier, charged with something unnatural, something wrong. The flickering torchlight barely cut through the gloom, but what little they could see made the villagers slow their steps. The cavern ahead wasn't like the others. It wasn't made of crumbling rock or twisted roots. It was something older, something built, the mine of the damned. Hagen took the first cautious step forward, his bow still smeared with blood from the pit disaster. The others followed, torches held high, their flames flickering wildly, as if the very air was trying to snuff them out. Then they saw it. At first they thought the walls were painted black, charred by an old fire perhaps, but as they drew closer, they realized it was something else entirely. Stone fused with something dark, something unnatural. The walls weren't just black, they shimmered, catching the light in sickly green flashes, like a blade held beneath a stormy sky. Hagen's stomach twisted. This wasn't iron ore. This wasn't silver or gold. This was warpstone. A warpstone mine. A place where the winds of magic ran wild, where men went mad, where beasts were twisted beyond recognition, and they had walked straight into its rotting heart. Eyes in the dark. Don't touch the walls, Hagen muttered. The villagers obeyed, but their eyes darted around, their faces pale. Even Father Albrecht, normally the pillar of their faith, seemed uneasy. The mine stretched far beyond their torches' reach, tunnels branching in a maze that looked too unnatural to have been made by human hands. Then, deep in the shadows, Hagen saw them. Faint, flickering, red. At first he thought it was a trick of the torchlight, a reflection off the cursed ore. But then they blinked. He froze. His breath hitched. It was watching them. Not moving, not advancing, just watching. The eyes didn't belong to a beast. They belonged to something that knew patience. Something that enjoyed the waiting. The hairs on the back of Hagen's neck stood on end. Slowly his fingers wrapped around his bowstring. His breath came fast, shallow. He could feel it. Something was here, something else, and it was not alone. Chapter 9. A City of Nightmares. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, so immense that their torches barely reached the ceiling. The air was thick with dust and decay, the silence so complete it felt unnatural, as though even the shadows were holding their breath. At first the villagers dared to hope. Ruins. Crumbling buildings carved from jagged black stone, their edges worn by time and war, bridges collapsed into chasms, tunnels sealed by ancient cave-ins. A dead city. A forgotten city. But Hagen knew better. Nothing in these depths was ever truly abandoned. Remnants of a war long lost. They walked cautiously, boots kicking up dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The buildings loomed around them, alien, jagged, the architecture too twisted, too unnatural to have been built by men. This is not dwarfen work, Father Albrecht muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It is not human. Hagen ran his fingers over clawed markings along the walls. He didn't recognize the symbols, but he knew what had made them. This was Skaven work. And more than that, this had been a war zone. Chunks of broken armor, shattered bone, and rusted blades littered the ruins, evidence of a conflict long past. Deep gouges marred the stone where claws had once scraped in desperate battle. The tunnels above had been collapsed on purpose, as if to trap something inside. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been a slow death. It had been a slaughter. The signs of life or death. "This place is cursed," one of the villagers muttered. "We should turn back," another hissed. "There is no turning back," Father Albrecht snapped, spinning toward them, his torch shaking in his grip. "We move forward, or we die here." No one argued, because something else had taken their attention. A faint sound, a rustling, a shift in the still air. Something small skittering through the ruins. Something alive. The villagers froze. Hagen slowly nocked an arrow, his breath coming shallow and quick. "It's not empty," he whispered. And then a low chittering sound echoed from the darkness ahead. Not one voice. Men. The ruins were not abandoned. They had only been waiting. Chapter 10. The Puppet Master Revealed. The ruins of the fallen Skaven warren felt like a graveyard, but no graveyard was ever this alive. The air itself hummed with unseen movement. Shadows shifted unnaturally, twisting through crumbling tunnels, and the chittering whispers of unseen mouths echoed just beyond the reach of their torchlight. Hagen kept his bow drawn, sweat beading on his brow. Father Albrecht clutched his hammer, his face carved from stone. The villagers huddled together, their breathing sharp and panicked. They all felt it. Something was here. Something was watching. And then it spoke. The master of the game. Or weak man-things. Lost scared. Trapped. The voice slithered through the ruins, an oily rasp that curled into their ears like a worm burrowing into flesh. From the shadows above, a figure dropped onto a crumbling balcony, landing with a feline grace that no man should possess. Black cloak billowing, red eyes burning, teeth gleaming like tiny daggers. Sreek Vilefang had finally stepped into the light. Gasps of horror rippled through the group. The villagers staggered backward, some clutching their mouths, others whimpering at the sight of the creature before them. A Skaven. A rat man standing tall, his long tail curling and flicking with amusement, his clawed hands twitching, ready, always ready to strike. Father Albrecht raised his hammer, but Sreek, no, priest thing. The assassin chittered, his whiskers twitching. Be still, yes, I am not here to kill. Harm you? Not yet. Hagen felt his fingers tighten on the bowstring. It took everything in him not to loose an arrow into the creature's chest. Why, Hagen growled, why have you led us here? Sreek spread his arms as if he were welcoming guests into his domain. Led? He cackled. No. Guided, helped. I did good work, yes. His claws gleamed in the dim torchlight, and the sight of them made the villagers shrink back further. Sreek tilted his head, feigning concern. Mon, things are weak tired. You do not like this place, no? Want to go home, yes? A tense silence. Then, a whisper from the back of the group. You can take us back? Sreek's grin widened. Oh yes. There is a way out, a safe way. His voice was honeyed poison, smooth and sickly sweet. But. His head snapped sharply to the side, eyes glinting. There is a price. Obedience or death. Father Albrecht stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. What do you want, beast? Sreek purred, tail flicking. Obedience. A ripple of unease passed through the villagers. I have plans, yes, big grand schemes. My masters watch from below, they see, know all. They want new servants, slaves, things to use. His beady red eyes narrowed. You, man-things, will serve. Or you will die. A long, sickening pause. Some of the villagers glanced at each other, doubt flickering in their exhausted faces. Hagen's jaw clenched. He knew what was happening. Sreek was playing them. The assassin had hunted them like prey, driven them to terror, to desperation, and now he offered them a way out, knowing that fear could break them faster than any blade. The air grew thicker, heavy with expectation. Then Father Albert spoke. Never. His voice rang like a hammer on steel. We will never serve monsters. The villagers held their breath. Sreek's grin faltered, just for a moment. Then it returned, sharper than ever. Pity, he purred. He took a step back, vanishing once more into the shadows above. Hagen felt his stomach drop. No, something was wrong. Sreek had never intended to bargain. This was just the next step in the game. And from deep within the ruins, beneath the crumbling stones, something shifted, something stirred. Something hungry began to wake. Chapter 11. False Hope. The silence after Sreek's departure was thick enough to choke on. The villagers stood motionless, their torches flickering against the ruined stone of the fallen Skaven warren, their minds caught between fear and despair. A way out. That was what Sreek had dangled before them, like a noose disguised as a lifeline. A promise of escape, but at what cost? Certitude? Death? Something worse? Hagen's hands shook with fury, his grip so tight on his bow that his knuckles had turned bone-white. This is a trap, he snarled, voice low but sharp. He's playing with us. We can't follow him. Father Albrecht exhaled slowly, gripping the hammer of Sigmar at his belt. His face was calm, but his eyes were filled with the weight of grim understanding. I know, the priest admitted, but we have no choice. The herd is driven. From somewhere in the tunnels ahead, Sreek's chittering voice echoed through the ruins, carrying through the darkness like a taunt. Come, man-things, follow. A villager, a young farmhand named Otto, staggered forward, his face pale, his breath shallow. We should go, Otto whispered. We can't stay here. We'll die here." Margareta, the butcher's wife, nodded weakly. "We don't know if he's lying." "We do," Hagen snapped, turning to face them, frustration bleeding into his words. "He's Skaven. That's what they do. They lie, they trick, they wait until you're weak, then they strike." "And what would you have us do?" Marguerite shot back. "Stay here? Starve? Rot in the dark?" Hagen's jaw tightened. The villagers were breaking. Terror had set in like a disease, eating away at reason, at resistance, at survival itself. And Sreek knew it. This was the real trap, not claws, not blades, but despair. And it was working. A struggle for control. Father Albrecht raised a hand, his voice steady but firm. "We follow, for now." Hagen whipped around to face him. "No, you can't be serious." "I am," the priest interrupted. "We need to move. The deeper we go, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the better chance we have of surviving." Hagen's heart pounded against his ribs. No, this was wrong. They were walking into a slaughter. They had to fight now, before it was too late. His fingers tightened on the bowstring. A single shot, a single arrow. If he could kill Sreek now, something snapped. Not from Hagen, from the shadows above. The strike that never lands. Cogs. A black blur dropped from the ruins above, landing just outside the torchlight with a sickening scrape of claws on stone. The villagers staggered back. Hagen reacted instantly. He spun, loosing an arrow into the darkness. But Sreek was faster. The Skaven assassin twisted, the arrow whistling past his cheek, scraping against his ear but missing the kill. And then he was gone, back into the shadows, laughter rising from the depths. Oh, fool thing is angry. Yes, weak, frail man thing wants to kill. Ha! Try again. Maybe you hit next time. Yes. His voice echoed from every direction, impossible to track. Hagen's breath came fast and sharp, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He had missed. And now Sreek knew. The game had changed. The hunter was now prey. And the real nightmare was about to begin. Chapter 12. Turned Tables. The mocking echoes of Skreek's laughter still hung in the air when Hagen fired again. The arrow streaked through the blackness, a flash of sharpened iron, straight into the shadows above. A sharp, high-pitched shriek tore through the cavern. Hagen's heart slammed against his ribs. He'd hit him. The villagers gasped, some stepping backward, others watching in stunned silence as something shifted in the ruins above. The Skaven hadn't expected that. The predator becomes prey. A clawed hand emerged from the darkness, gripping the crumbling edge of the broken archway. Then a figure staggered into the dim torchlight. Sreek Vilefang hunched over, his black cloak now ripped and streaked with blood. The arrow jutted from his shoulder, buried deep in the taut muscle beneath his fur. His tail lashed wildly, his ears flat against his skull, his breathing rapid and wheezing. For the first time the assassin looked uncertain. For the first time he had miscalculated. The man-things weren't as weak as he thought. His red eyes flicked to Hagen, his snarl revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "You will squeal first, hunter thing," he spat, his voice rasping with pain. "I will flay your skin." Hagen fired again. Sreek dodged. The assassin dropped, hitting the ground with a fluid roll, but not fast enough. The arrow grazed his thigh, slicing clean through the edge of his flesh. Another chittering shriek. Skreek's claws scraped against stone, barely regaining his footing. His movements were slower now, his form lopsided with pain. And Hagen was already drawing another arrow. Sreek snarled. No, this is not how it happens. He was the hunter, not them, not these man-things. He bared his teeth, but his calculating mind was already racing. Fight or flee? Another arrow whistled toward him. Flee, always flee. With a final furious hiss, Sreek twisted and vanished into the tunnels, his dark form blending into the ruins' shadows. His blood dripped onto the stone, leaving a trail behind him as he slithered into the abyss. The shift in power. For the first time since they had entered the tunnels, the villagers had wounded the monster. For the first time, Sreek ran from them. The fear that had gripped them so tightly cracked, just a little. Hagen slowly lowered his bow, his chest heaving. The villagers stared at him, then at the Skaven's blood, still glistening wet on the stone. "We can fight," someone whispered. "We can kill them," another muttered. Father Albrecht stepped forward, eyes flicking toward the dark tunnels where Sreek had fled. His jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, "we can." For the first time since entering the Under-Empire, the humans weren't just running. Now they were hunting. Chapter 13. The Unseen Enemy. The blood trail vanished into the dark. For a long, breathless moment the villagers stood motionless, listening to the echoes of Sreek's retreating footsteps fade into the labyrinth of tunnels. Hagen felt the familiar ache of exhaustion in his arms, his bow still raised, string taut. His breathing was shallow, sharp. They had hurt him, but they hadn't killed him, and that meant he would come back. Lost in the Under-Empire. "We need to move," Father Albrecht said, his voice steady but grim. "We've spent too much time here." "Where?" Margarita asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Which way?" That was the problem. The ruined Skaven warren stretched before them, tunnels branching in every direction, twisting paths, spiraling stairwells that led to blackened depths, old burrows choked with collapsed stone. Everything looked the same. The walls bore the same clawed markings, the same warp-tainted symbols, as if the tunnels were shifting around them, leading them deeper even as they tried to move forward. Hagen ground his teeth. A Sreek had been leading them, manipulating their every step. Now, without him, they were truly lost. "Pick a direction," Hagen muttered, gripping his bow tighter, "before something else finds us." Father Albrecht nodded. "This way." The group pressed forward. Something watches. The tunnels stretched on, silent except for their footsteps. The further they walked, the more the ruins changed. The stonework shifted from the jagged, crude Skaven structures to something else entirely, older, more alien. Twisted arches, slanted corridors, strange symbols carved into the walls in a language that no human could read. No one spoke of it, but the feeling settled in their bones. They weren't supposed to be here. And then, from somewhere in the endless dark, a sound. A slow, deep chittering. Something had noticed them. Moving pieces. Hagen froze. The villagers halted behind him, holding their breath. The sound had been far away, but not far enough. He turned to Father Albrecht, whispering low, "Did you hear that?" The priest gave a single, slow nod. His grip tightened on his hammer. They weren't alone. They had never been alone. Something was watching. Something was following. And it was only a matter of time before it struck. Chapter 14. Fangs in the Dark. A predator becomes prey. A drip. A single drop of Sreek's blood splattered onto the damp stone. In another. The pain in his shoulder throbbed with each frantic movement, the arrow wound burning like fire beneath his matted black fur. He had snapped the shaft, but the jagged tip remained buried deep, a cruel reminder of his failure. Weak. Fool stupid. He had underestimated the man-things. He had played with them, toyed with their fear, and they had bitten back. Now Sreek Valfang ran for his life. His claws scrabbled against the tunnel walls as he weaved through the ruins, his mind racing for a way out. His ears twitched at every sound, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Something was following him, something that did not belong to Clan Eshin. The deep dwellers. A low growl rumbled from the tunnel behind him. Sreek whipped his head around, his red eyes wide, his whiskers twitching. The darkness moved. Something massive slithered forward, its claws clicking against the stone. A mutant thing, a beast twisted by the Under-Empire, one of the forgotten horrors that thrived in the deepest burrows where even the Skaven feared to tread. It had no fur, only pale, leathery flesh, its jaws lined with jagged teeth, its milky white eyes blind, yet locked onto his scent. A barrel mile. Skreek's tail lashed as the beast lunged forward. He threw himself to the side, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest as he rolled, barely dodging the creature's snapping jaws. Too slow, too weak, it smells your blood. With a frantic snarl, Sreek bolted deeper into the ruins, the burrow maw in pursuit, crashing through the narrow tunnels, eager for the taste of wounded prey. For the first time in his life, Sreek was being hunted. The villagers' first Skaven kill. While Sreek ran for his life, the villagers marched unknowingly toward their own doom. The ruins had led them into a tight, suffocating tunnel, the air thick with the reek of filth and decay. Hagen didn't need to see the tracks in the grime to know what lived here. The Skaven were close. Then he heard it, a low chittering. Hagen raised a fist, and the group froze. The torchlight flickered over movement ahead, shadows shifting unnaturally, eyes gleaming red in the dark. Then, from the tunnel ahead, a pair of hunched figures emerged. Skaven. Not assassins like Sreek. These were clan rats, their patchy fur matted with filth, their crude, rusted blades drawn. Their noses twitched, sniffing the air, their beady eyes narrowing. For a moment, neither side moved. Then, a shriek. The Skaven charged. Hagen let his arrow fly. Quick. The first Skaven staggered back, an arrow buried deep in its throat, its scream dying in a gurgle. The second rat lunged toward Margarita, rusted blade raised. Father Albrecht struck first. His hammer came down, cracking the ratman's skull open like a rotten fruit. The creature crumpled, twitching once before falling still. Silence followed. The villagers stared at the bodies, their hands shaking, their breath ragged. They had killed them. Real, flesh and blood. Not monsters from a nightmare, but Skaven. Hagen exhaled sharply, gripping his bow. Now they know we're here. A chill swept through the tunnel, because if there were two, there would be more, and this time they wouldn't be caught off guard. Chapter 15. Caught in the Web. The tunnels grew stranger the deeper they went. The rough, uneven stone of the ruined Skaven warren gave way to something else. Metal plating bolted into the rock, pipes that pulsed with an eerie green glow. The air thick with the scent of ozone and burning hair. Hagen slowed his steps, his gut tightening. This wasn't just another forgotten ruin. They had stumbled into something worse. The lightning lair. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, its ceiling vanishing into darkness. Great, cobbled-together machines loomed around them, twisted, rattling things of brass and steel, their insides pulsing with glowing green crystals. Strange copper coils sparked with energy, sending crackling tendrils of light dancing through the air. A Skaven lair. No, more than that. A workshop. Margarita gasped. What is this place? Father Albrecht's grip tightened around his hammer. A blasphemy, he muttered. A mockery of science and magic alike. Then the voice came. A screeching, grating tone, somewhere between a scholar's rambling and the manic chittering of a starving beast. Ah, yes, yes. New specimens, fresh living things for test trial. Yes, yes. From a platform above them, something moved. A thin, wiry Skaven, his patchy fur stained with burn marks and oil, loomed over the group, his beady red eyes magnified by a pair of cracked lenses. Cables ran from his back, disappearing into the walls, his fingers twitching with excitement as he held a sparking, rune-covered contraption in his hands. A warlock engineer, Rickett Sparkclaw, and he was very, very pleased to see them. The trap springs. Manx wander into my lab, workshop. Rickett cackled, his tail curling as he hunched forward. Yes, yes, good, good. Fresh meat bodies for the tests. A horrible screeching sound came from the tunnel behind them. Hagen's blood ran cold. More Skaven. Before he could raise his bow, metallic cages snapped up from the floor, their rusted bars slamming shut around them with a clank of steel. The villagers shouted, panicked, slamming their fists against the bars, but the cages were too strong. They were trapped. Rickett scuttled down the platform, his fingers flexing with gleeful anticipation. Oh, yes, yes, perfect, perfect, no more dead things, no, need live test subjects, he jabbered, spitting excitedly as he examined them through the bars. Yes, yes, you will do nicely, warm, fleshy ones. Time to see if lightning burns inside out. Yes, yes. Hagen's breath hitched. Father Albrecht met his gaze, his expression grim. They weren't going to die from starvation. They were going to die screaming. Unless they found a way out. Chapter 16. The Betrayal of Sreek. The cages stank of rust and fear. Hagen clenched his fists around the cold metal bars, his breathing slow and steady, but his heart pounded like a war drum. Across the chamber, Rickett Sparkclaw scuttled between his groaning, sparking machines, muttering to himself, occasionally jabbing at glowing rune panels with his clawed fingers. The villagers' fate was already being decided. They were test subjects, to be burned, to be dissected, to be broken. And the Skaven engineer was too distracted to notice that someone else had entered the room. A shadow moved at the entrance to the workshop, unseen, unheard. Then came the voice. Low, calculated, poisonous. Ah, most clever, smart engineer, Sreek Vilefang purred, stepping forward. I have news offer, yes, yes. The desperate bargain. Rickett Sparkclaw's head snapped up, his oversized lenses magnifying his beady red eyes as he turned to face the newcomer. Hagen's breath caught in his throat. Sreek? The assassin stood at the edge of the light, his cloak torn, his fur matted with blood, but his teeth were bared in a confident grin. He looked desperate, but not beaten. The wound in his shoulder still bled, his movements slower than before, but he was still standing. And he had a plan. Rickett's whiskers twitched as he eyed Sreek up and down. Eshin clan filth, yes, yes, the warlock engineer snorted, stepping forward. What do you want? Want. I have no time for assassins. No, no. I have work to do, test things to burn, melt, explode, yes, yes. Ha! He gestured wildly toward the villagers, his claws crackling with green sparks. But Sreek simply tilted his head, his tail flicking. Oh, yes, yes, but this is wasteful. You test kill the man things, yes, yes, but what of the bigger, greater prize? Rika's ear twitched. Intrigued. Good. Sreek stepped closer, voice smooth as silk, sharp as glass. These ones? They are strong, useful, Sreek continued, his claws twitching in a gesture of mock generosity. Why not give them to Clan Eshin, yes, yes? Make more slaves, more work things. Rickett paused. Hagen felt his stomach churn. Sreek was selling them out, bargaining their lives, not to be burned away in Rickett's twisted experiments, but to be taken into the depths of the Under-Empire, shackled and used until nothing remained of them. And worst of all, Rickett was considering it. The warlock engineer tapped his clawed fingers against his chin, muttering, calculating. Yes, yes. More slaves mean more work. Works. Good, good. Maybe, maybe. But why should I not melt-fry you instead, assassin thing? What use are you? Sreek bowed his head, but his voice was like a blade in the dark. Oh, because I know this place. His fangs glinted. I know how to make them break. A new master, a new doom. The Skaven laughed. Not just Sreek, not just Ricket. The shadows in the tunnels beyond the workshop rippled, and the sound of chittering voices echoed from the darkness. More were coming. More Skaven. More horrors. Hagen's breath came shallow and sharp. Sreek had played his hand, and now their fates belonged to Clan Eshin. They weren't going to be executed here. They were going to be taken, dragged deeper, to a place where no human had ever returned from. Chapter 17. Experimentation and Escape. The screams never stopped. They rose and fell like the tides, a symphony of agony and madness echoing through the twisted corridors of Ricket Sparkla's laboratory. The Skaven warlock engineer had wasted no time. As soon as the deal with Sreek was struck, the villagers had been dragged from their cages, shackled in rusted manacles, and forced into the depths of the sprawling Skaven warren beyond the workshop. And now they were being tested. And you broke for science. The torture of knowledge. Hagen had seen 4 die already. The first, a young blacksmith's apprentice, had been strapped to a rusted metal table, his limbs locked in place by jagged, barbed clamps. Ricket's assistants, hunched, squealing clan rats, had inserted a glowing shard of warpstone into his chest cavity, forcing it into his ribs like a second heart. He had lasted 12 seconds. Then he had exploded. The second victim had been pumped full of green lightning, his body twisting unnaturally, his flesh boiling from the inside out before he finally collapsed into a smoldering heap. The third and fourth had been cut apart, their bodies dissected for research, their organs poked and prodded with clawed fingers, while Ricket chittered his observations aloud. Every second was a waking nightmare. Hagen's fists clenched, the smell of burnt flesh and rot sticking to his lungs like tar. He had to act. No, before he ended up on that rusted table. The spark of rebellion. The Skaven were confident. Too confident. They had broken humans before. They had dragged thousands of screaming prisoners into the depths of the Under-Empire, never to be seen again. They did not fear the few pathetic, unarmed villagers left alive. That was their first mistake. The second? They had left Skaven weapons lying around. Hagen's eyes flicked to a pile of discarded scry weaponry, warplock pistols, jagged shock staves, a strange humming contraption that crackled with energy. They were watching him, but not closely enough. He made his move. Fast. Silent. 1 second he was just another prisoner, shuffling forward in the line. The next, he had a Skaven pistol in his hands. A twisted, ugly thing, built from rusted metal and warpstone. But it had a trigger, and that was all he needed. Chaos unleashed. Hagen didn't hesitate. He whipped around, aimed for the nearest Skaven overseer, and fired. A green blast of warp energy ripped through the air, slamming into the Ratman's skull, vaporizing his head on impact. The cavern exploded into chaos. The villagers erupted into action, years of suppressed fear and rage boiling over in an instant. Margareta drove a stolen shock prod into a clan rat's gut, sending it into violent spasms before it collapsed, twitching and smoking. Father Albrecht wielded a Skaven blade, a serrated, wicked thing, and split another rat's throat open in a single, furious swipe. The remaining prisoners tore into their captors, using teeth, fists, chains, anything they could get their hands on. The Skaven, caught completely off guard, squealed in panic as the revolt spread like wildfire. Ricket's rage. From the upper levels of the lab, Rickett Sparklaw howled with fury. No, no, kill-crush them, stop the man-things, stupid fools. His clawed hands flew over controls, pulling levers, activating hissing vents that spewed green fog into the chamber. But it was too late. The humans had tasted hope, and they would not be caged again. Hagen snatched another pistol, tossing it to Father Albrecht. "Keep moving," he shouted. "We need to get out before the entire cavern shook. A low, rumbling noise echoed from the tunnels beyond the lab. A sound Hagen had never heard before. Something big was coming, and it wasn't coming to save them. 1/2. Chapter 18. The Rise of the Prey. The stink of burnt flesh and warp energy clung to the cavern air as the last scave screech faded into nothing. For the first time, the humans were winning. Hagen stood at the center of the carnage, a looted warp-lock pistol smoking in his hands, its warped green glow casting eerie shadows across his face. The corpses of clan rats and Skreer engineers littered the floor, their broken bodies twisted in pain. Villagers, bloodied but standing, gripped Skaven blades, shock prods and warp-lock rifles, their hands slick with the blood of their captors. They weren't prisoners anymore. They were hunters. And in the shadows above them, Sreek Vilefang watched. His claws trembled, his tail flicked nervously, his wounded shoulder burned with fresh pain. This was wrong. This was not how the game was played. The man-things were supposed to run, squeal, break, not fight, not win. And yet, here they were. His prey had become something else entirely. They had become the predators. Revenge in the making. Father Albrecht stood beside Hagen, a Skaven warblade gripped in his hands, its wicked, serrated edge still dripping. His face was pale, his eyes filled with rage and righteous fury. "More will come," he muttered. "They won't let us escape." Hagen didn't need to be told. He could already hear them. Skittering, chittering, the distant echoes of reinforcements. The Skaven weren't done yet. Margarita tightened her grip on a looted shock prod, her expression grim. "Then we take as many of them with us as we can." The villagers nodded in agreement. They had been hunted, beaten, experimented on, and now it was their turn. Skreek's whiskers twitched uncontrollably as he watched the humans rally. This was not normal. This was not right. Man-things fought, sometimes, if they had to, but not like this. Not with Skaven weapons in their hands. Not with eyes that burned with fury, not fear. His stomach twisted with unease. He had spent years learning the art of fear, of control, of knowing when prey was ready to break. This prey had not broken. This prey had become something else. He licked his lips, chittering nervously. His mind raced, calculating, adjusting, finding the next move in the game. Stay, fight, run, hide. His claws curled around his daggers. He needed to think. He needed to act. But for the first time in his life, Sreek Vilefang didn't know what to do. The hunter strikes back. Hagen turned toward the ruined tunnel entrance, listening to the growing sounds of approaching Skaven. "Barricade the doors," he ordered. "Set up the weapons. They want to drag us down?" He cocked the warp-lock pistol, its green runes pulsing with deadly energy. "Let's show them what that feels like." The villagers nodded, their faces hard, unyielding. They weren't running anymore, and the Skaven had no idea what was coming for them. Chapter 19. Skreek's Fall. Sreek never ran. Not from prey, not from man-things. But now, his breath came ragged, his paws slipping on the blood-slick stone, his mind racing for an escape. Everything had changed. The man-things had weapons now. Skaven weapons. And worse, they knew how to use them. Hagen's warplock pistol cracked behind him, a green bolt of energy slamming into the wall inches from his head. Too close. Too close. Sreek ducked, rolling into the shadows, his claws digging for purchase as he slithered through a side tunnel. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The humans were meant to run, squeal, break. Instead, they were hunting him. The turning of the tides. The tunnels of the ruined warren twisted and turned, old burrows and collapsed passageways forcing Sreek to navigate blind. He needed to reassert dominance. He needed to strike first, but every time he tried to double back, he caught glimpses of them in the shadows. Not scurrying, not retreating, stalking, like he had once stalked them. A flash of movement, a torch reflecting off warplock steel. A whisper of footsteps, not frantic but measured, controlled. A voice, Hagen's voice. "I know you're out there, rat." Sreek's fur bristled. No fear, no hesitation. Hagen was playing the game better than him. The hunter had become the assassin, and Sreek Vilefang was running out of time. A cornered beast. His tail lashed behind him as he darted down another narrow passage, his breath shallow, quick. He needed an advantage. He needed the shadows. A familiar shape loomed ahead, an old watchpoint built long ago by his Skaven kin, half collapsed from some forgotten battle. The perfect place to strike. Yes. He would turn the tables again. He would slaughter them in the dark. He would... Click. Something cold and metal pressed against his skull. His blood turned to ice. The assassin falls. Turn around. Hagen's voice was calm but filled with fury. Slowly Sreek turned. The barrel of a warplock pistol met his gaze, its sickly green glow reflecting in his wide, panicked eyes. Behind Hagen, the villagers stood like ghosts, their clothes torn, their bodies bloodied, but their eyes were sharp, determined. They had been hunted, broken, tortured, and now they stood over him. Sreek opened his mouth to speak, to twist words, to slither out of this. Hagen pulled the trigger. Boom! The shot ripped through Sreek's chest, his body jerking back against the wall, his claws clutching at the wound as smoke curled from the hole burned straight through him. He gasped, blood bubbling from his lips, his legs trembling, failing. His mind reeled. No, not like this. Not by them. Not by the prey. He slid to the floor, vision darkening, his own heartbeat slowing in his ears. The game was over, and Sreek Vilefang, hunter of men, assassin of Clan Eshin, was no more. Chapter 20. Clawlord's Wrath. Deep within the Under-Empire, where the warpstone veins pulsed like living things, and the air reeked of blood and ambition, a clawed fist slammed against a table, sending runes, maps, and half-eaten bones scattering to the floor. Clawlord Vichnortail bared his yellowed fangs, his tail whipping the air in agitation. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a rasping growl, the war chamber thick with the scent of rage. The lesser Skaven before him trembled, their tails curled in submission, their heads bowed low as the Clawlord's glare swept over them. One of them, a scry warlock, his fur streaked with soot and grease, flinched as Vrich's eyes locked onto him. "Explain, tell me why I hear man things loose in my tunnels, why I hear Rickett Sparkclaw is dead-failed, why I hear Sreek Vilefang is slain." The room fell silent. The air hung heavy with tension. Then the warlock cleared his throat, stepping forward, his whiskers twitching nervously. Yes, mighty Clawlord. The assassin was weak, useless. He lost control. "Yes, I know," Vrich roared, his claws scraping deep gouges into the war table. Tell me what has been done about it." The warlock hesitated. "Nothing yet, great Clawlord." Vrich's snarl deepened. "Nothing? Nothing?" Man-things had killed Skaven in his tunnels. They had stolen Skaven weapons. They had killed a warlock engineer and an assassin. And nothing had been done? Unacceptable. This was not a simple failure. This was a threat. And threats were to be exterminated. The extermination order. Vrich rose from his seat, his armor clanking, the spiked plates across his shoulders glinting in the dim green light of the chamber. The Skaven before him shrank away, but he paid them no mind. His clawed fingers flexed, curling around the hilt of his blade, vermin's bane, a wicked, serrated sword stained with the blood of friend and foe alike. "Summon my storm vermin," he ordered. "Summon my elite killers, my packmasters, my war beasts." His voice echoed through the chamber, sending the lesser Skaven scurrying in all directions, eager to obey. The Clawlord's red eyes gleamed. The man-things had thought themselves clever. They had thought themselves strong. They had killed Skaven. That meant they were worth killing. He leaned over the table, his lips curling into a razor-sharp grin. "Hunt them down," he growled. "Kill them all." Chapter 21. The March of Doom. The tunnels trembled. The air was thick with a reek of filth and fury, the scent of Skaven bloodlust bleeding through the ancient stonework. They were coming, a horde, not of mindless beasts, but of organized slaughter, a wave of claw and fang, sent forth by Clawlord Vrich Gnawtail himself. And they were not coming to capture. They were coming to kill. The Skaven war machine stirs. At the heart of the advancing warband, Claw Captain Scritch Fangsnout stalked ahead, his jagged black armor glinting in the dim green light of the warp lamps. Behind him, the forces of the Under-Empire assembled. Hundreds of Skaven slaves, their thin, mangy bodies trembling with fear, herded forward by snarling packmasters, their whips cracking through the cavern air. Storm vermin, their spiked armor painted in the blood of past conquests, gripping long halberds and serrated blades, their red eyes gleaming with cruel purpose. Rat ogres, hulking monstrosities, their bodies a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, their eyes filled with nothing but pain and violence. And above them all, on a rusted Skaven war platform, rode the warlock engineers, their crackling warp lightning devices humming with barely contained energy. The tunnels shook beneath their march. Their whispers became a chorus of war chittering, a relentless, insatiable hunger for flesh and vengeance. They were here to wipe away the insult of human resistance, to burn away the shame of failure, to bury Sreek's disgrace beneath a mountain of corpses, to hunt with two prey. Scritch Fangsnout licked his fangs, his claws flexing eagerly. "The man-things, yes, yes," he muttered. "Find, kill them all. But what of Sreek traitor?" One of the packmasters cackled, his tail twitching. "Already marked, hunted. Vrich wants him dead. Too, yes, yes. No failures, no weak. Scritch grinned. Good. No loose ends. They would hunt both the humans and the assassin. Sreek would be found. The man-things would be exterminated, and the tunnels of the Under-Empire would run red with blood. With a howl, Scritch raised his rusted blade, and the Skaven horde surged forward. The March of Doom had begun. Chapter 22. Broken Tunnels. The tunnels had been twisting against them for hours. Every passage looked the same: glistening rock, collapsed burrows, the lingering scent of Skaven filth thick in the damp air. And yet, something had changed. The deeper they went, the less the tunnels looked like they had been made by Skaven claws. The walls were too smooth, the air too still, as if they had stumbled into a place not meant for them. Hagen felt it first. The hair on his arm stood on end, his breath growing shallow, as if some ancient presence stirred in the darkness around them. Then the tunnel opened up. And what they saw was impossible. The Forgotten Temple. A cavern unlike any before stretched before them, vast, alien, untouched by time. At its heart, carved from obsidian stone, stood a temple, its walls covered in ancient glyphs and symbols, its towering entrance lined with statues that had long since crumbled into dust. It was not human, and it was not Skaven. Father Albrecht stepped forward, his torchlight licking against the glyphs, revealing their faded beauty. This is old," he murmured, awe creeping into his voice. Hagen ran a hand over the worn stone, frowning. "Dorfin?" he asked. Albrecht shook his head. "No, the craftsmanship is wrong." The air grew thicker, the silence pressing in. Margarita swallowed. "Then what is it?" No one answered. Because none of them knew. Echoes of the past. Strange carvings lined the walls, depicting figures in flowing robes, their hands raised toward a black sun, their faces eroded by time. Below them, etched in stark contrast, were warriors, locked in battle against beasts with too many eyes, too many limbs. Hagen's fingers traced the images absently. "This is a tomb." Father Albrecht's brow furrowed. A temple built around a tomb, perhaps. But why so deep, and why abandoned? His voice faded into the emptiness, swallowed by the thick, watching silence. Hagen felt something shift beneath his feet. Not physically, but in a way he could not explain. A whisper of movement, something long forgotten stirring in the dark. Something watching, deeper into mystery. "We shouldn't be here," one of the villagers muttered. Hagen wanted to agree. But ahead, past the cracked pillars and half-buried statues, lay another tunnel, one that stretched further into the unknown. And with the Skaven horde closing in behind them, they had only one choice. Forward, into the lost temple of something long dead. Worse, something that was not dead at all. Chapter 23. The Artifact of Survival. The temple breathed with silence, a silence so deep, so unnatural it felt as if the very walls were waiting. The villagers moved through the forgotten hallways, their torchlight flickering against pillars carved with symbols lost to time. No Skaven filth, no warp-tainted markings. This place had been built long before the Ratmen scurried into existence. And deep within its core, past crumbling staircases and shadowed corridors, Hagen saw it. Something massive, something impossible. Something that could save them. The heart of the machine. The chamber before them was a ruin of ancient gears, rusted chains, and crumbling stone, half buried beneath centuries of dust and silence. And at its center, encased in bronze and blackened iron, lay a mechanism unlike anything they had ever seen. It stood as tall as a house, its surface etched with runic symbols, its levers and gears twisted with dwarfen craftsmanship, though many pieces had long since fallen apart. Margarita let out a low whistle. What is this?" Father Albrecht, eyes wide with awe, ran his fingers across the surface of a massive, ancient lever. "A dwarfen failsafe," he whispered. "A mechanism of last resort." Hagen turned to him, heart hammering. "What does it do?" The priest swallowed hard. "If I'm reading these runes right," his voice wavered, "it's a tunnel concept device. A risky plan." Silence fell over the group. A way out, a real way out. Not running, not fighting, collapsing the entire tunnel network behind them, burying the Skaven army alive, and sealing this place forever. Hagen's hands tightened into fists. "Can we make it work?" Father Albrecht sighed, tracing the runes with careful reverence. "It's damaged, but I think so. The cost of survival." "Wait," one of the villagers stammered, stepping back. If we use this thing, what happens to us? Albrecht exhaled slowly. We'll need to get far enough ahead before we trigger it, he admitted. If we don't, we die with them. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance they had. Hagen gritted his teeth. Then there was no time to waste. They had to move. And once they reached the right point in the tunnels, they would bring it all crashing down. Chapter 24. The Final Gambit. The tunnels shook with the sound of approaching death. The Skaven horde was coming. Storm vermin, rat ogres, swarms of chittering slaves, a wave of fur, fang, and malice, driven forward by Clawlord Vrich Gnawtail's wrath. And Hagen knew they would be on them in minutes. There was no running now. No hiding. Only one path forward. Activate the device. Collapse the tunnels. Bury them all. But to do that, someone had to hold the line. A stand against the swarm. Father Albrecht slammed his shoulder against a rusted mechanism, muscles straining as he tried to force it into motion. The ancient dwarven machine groaned under the pressure, its gears grinding, but it was slow. Too slow. Hagen stood beside him, sweat dripping down his forehead, his warplock pistol clutched tightly in his hands. Faster, Hagen growled, glancing toward the tunnel entrance. From the darkness, the first sounds of Skaven voices echoed. Chittering. Laughing. Howling. The villagers behind them worked frantically, pulling at rusted levers, trying to force the mechanism into motion. But the machine had not been used in centuries, and time was running out. Margaret's voice rose in panic. They're here. Hagen turned, just in time to see the first wave of Skaven pouring into the temple. The first wave hits. The Skaven slaves came first, hundreds of them, snarling, frothing at the mouth, their rusted knives raised. Hagen fired his warplock pistol, the green blast of warp energy ripping through the first ratman's chest. Another lunged for him. Margaretti intercepted it, driving a shock prod into the creature's side. It convulsed violently, twitching as its fur caught fire. Then the real enemy arrived. Storm vermin. Bigger, faster, stronger. They came in disciplined formations, their black armor slick with filth, their halberds gleaming in the torchlight. Hagen had 1 second to react before the first strike came. He rolled beneath the blade, pivoted, and drove his stolen dagger into the creature's ribs. It hissed in fury, claws swiping at him, before Father Albrecht slammed his warhammer down, caving in its skull with a wet crunch. More were coming. Too many, and the machine was still not ready. The machine awakens. "Almost there," one of the villagers yelled, frantically cranking a rusted lever. The temple shook violently, dust cascading from the ceiling above. Then, a deep, guttural rumble filled the chamber. The dwarven mechanism groaned to life. Its ancient gears turned, grinding against centuries of rust, its pipes hissing, steam venting from cracks in its metal hide. Father Albrecht turned, breathless. "It's working." Hagen fired again, killing another Skane, but he barely had time to react before something huge slammed into him. A rat ogre. The last push. The hulking monster swiped at him, its mutated limbs twitching, its yellowed fangs bared in rage. Hagen barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as the ground cracked beneath the impact. Margareta fired a stolen warp lightning pistol at the beast, but it only roared, the energy scorching its flesh but failing to stop it. Hagen scrambled to his feet, searching for a weapon, any weapon. Father Albrecht saw it first. The lever. The one final switch that would activate the collapse. But it was across the room, past the Skaven, past the rat ogre. And there was no time. Hagen locked eyes with Albrecht. The priest nodded once, and then he ran. Straight toward the lever. Straight through the storm of claws. straight into the jaws of death. Chapter 25. Sreek's Last Chance. The world was crumbling around him. The ancient dwarven mechanism roared to life, its gears grinding, pistons screaming, as the entire temple shuddered under its immense power. Hagen and his people were fighting like cornered animals, Skaven bodies piling at their feet, and Sreek Vilefang, wounded and disgraced, watched from the shadows. This was it, his last chance. If he played this right, if he made the right kill, said the right words, he might still walk away from this, might even rise higher than before. Because in the end, the game was always about who survives. A predator with no pack. Sreek pressed a clawed hand to his bleeding chest wound, his breath coming fast and shallow. His former captives had turned against him. They had stolen Skaven weapons. They had humiliated him, driven him from his own hunt. But none of that mattered if he won now. His ears twitched as he listened. Storm vermin crashed through the tunnels, pushing deeper, their halberds cleaving through human flesh. A rat ogre bellowed, its massive form lunging through the wreckage toward Hagen. And beyond them all, the Claw Lord's forces. The war machines, the scryer engineers, the twisted, chittering ranks of Skaven ready to purge everything in their path. Sreek had one moment, one decision, one path to survival. The betrayal that would save him. A true Eshin assassin never dies in the dark. A true Eshin assassin adapts. Sreek straightened, pushing his weakened body forward, his claws twitching in anticipation. He would not beg. He would not cower. But he could offer something far greater than his own life. He approached Claw Captain Scritch Fangsnout, slipping between the ranks of storm vermin, tail flicking in submission, but his voice smooth, sharp, calculated. "Wait, do not kill, fail me. I bring information, acknowledge. Yes, great Claw Lord must hear this." Scritch sneered, halting his advance, his long fangs bared. Sreek Vilefang still lives, breathes, should be dead dying for his failures. "Failure? No, not failure. Clever plan scheme," Sreek hissed, bowing low, though his red eyes gleamed with ambition. "I can end this, yes," he chittered. "The man-things fight like mad rats, but I know their weakness. They are nothing without their leader. Hang one." Scritch hesitated. Sreek pressed forward, voice like poisoned silk. "I can kill slaughter the hunted thing," he snarled. Yes. If I do this, will Claw Lord Vrich listen here? Will I be rewarded?" Scritch's eyes narrowed. The assassin was weak, broken, but still useful, and Skaven did not waste useful things. "Ha, you fail, die if wrong. Yes, the Claw Captain sneered. "Go, kill man-thing leader, and maybe you live, breathe another day." Sreek grinned. Because he was not here to fight a war. He was here to end it with a single kill. Hagen would not survive this night. And when he fell, Sreek Vilefang would rise once more. Chapter 26. Betrayal upon Betrayal. Sreek had played the game well, or so he thought. His tail flicked eagerly as he scurried through the chaos of battle, weaving between storm vermin, scryer engineers, and the snarling masses of Skaven slaves. The tunnels boomed as the dwarven mechanism roared, the ceiling cracking, dust cascading in thick sheets. The humans fought desperately, but Sreek had the key to victory. A single kill. Hagen. The man-thing who had humiliated him. The one who had stolen his hunt. Sreek would slit his throat, carve his triumph into the stone. And then, at last, the Under-Empire would see him for what he was. A survivor. A true Eshin. He would stand before Claw Lord Vrich, blood on his claws, and take his place at the table once more. But the game had already turned against him. an audience with death. Two storm vermin guards shoved Sreek onto his knees, their rusted halberds pressed tight against his back. He barely had time to chitter in protest before the shadows before him moved, and Claw-Lord Vrichnaughtal stepped forward. His blackened armor glowed faintly green, his massive warblade dragging against the stone, leaving a scar in its wake. His red eyes burned like embers, and his voice slithered from his throat like a promise of death. Sreek Vilefang. A statement. A judgment. Sreek lowered his head, his whiskers twitching with feigned humility. Yes, mighty Claw-Lord. I. Vrich raised a hand, and Sreek froze. Your failures have cost me, Vrich growled, tail flicking with irritation. Man-things kill Skaven in my tunnels. Man-things steal our weapons. His voice darkened, a growl vibrating from his throat. And worst of all, man-things kill you. Sreek choked back a hiss. No, I am alive, Ong. I can fix this. I can kill the hunter thing. Vrich's expression did not change. He gestured to the storm vermin. Kill silence him. Betrayed by his own. Sreek's blood ran cold. No, this is wrong. This is not right. The storm vermin raised their halberds. Panic overtook him. He struggled, hissed, clawed at the dirt, desperate, anything to make them listen. No, I am useful. I am Clan Eshin. Yes, I know secrets. I know how to... The first blade struck. Sreek screeched, his body twisting in agony as steel bit into his back. Another strike, deep, cutting, sharp. His claws tore at the stone, his tail whipping wildly, but there was no escape. He had played the game, and he had lost. As he collapsed onto the blood-stained floor, his vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was Claw-Lord Vrich's cold, empty stare. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only indifference, because in the Under-Empire there was no room for failure. Sreek Vilefang, the hunter, the assassin, the survivor, was nothing more than another corpse in the dark. Chapter 27. The Turning of the Machine. The Under-Empire trembled. Deep beneath the surface, in a forgotten temple built before men even knew the name of the Skaven, something ancient and terrible groaned to life. The dwarven machine, long abandoned, its gears seized with rust, its runes faded with time, was finally awakening. It had been forged as a failsafe, a last-ditch effort to bury something terrible beneath the weight of the earth. And now, Hagen and his people were about to unleash it once more. A race against death. Hagen stood before the main control panel, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Behind him, the tunnels echoed with the howls of the Skaven, their claws scraping against the stone, their fury growing louder. They had minutes. Maybe less. Tell me this thing still works, Hagen growled. Father Albrecht wiped grime and blood from his forehead, his fingers frantically tracing the runes engraved in the metal. The dwarves built their machines to last, he muttered. This will hold. Hagen wasn't convinced. The mechanism looked half dead, its gears clogged with dirt, its pipes hissing faintly with escaping steam. But they didn't have another choice. He turned to Margarita and the others. Get to the tunnel exit. When this starts, the whole place is coming down. Margarita hesitated. What about you? Hagen gritted his teeth. I'll make sure it works. The villagers nodded, fear in their eyes, but also determination. They had made it this far. They wouldn't die here. The machine awakens. Father Albrecht slammed his palm against an ancient lever. The temple shook. A deep, thunderous groan erupted from the earth as the first gears began to turn, their ancient iron teeth grinding into place. Somewhere in the temple's depths, chains rattled, and a massive counterweight shifted, sending dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. The Skaven felt it instantly. Their chittering howls turned to panicked screeches. Even they understood what was about to happen. Hagen grabbed a second lever, his arms burning as he forced it downward. The machine roared. Pipes hissed, gears clanked, and then a deep, echoing crack ripped through the tunnels. The cave-ins had begun. The Under-Empire collapses. The first section of the temple gave way, the ground buckling as a massive stone pillar split down the middle. From the tunnels ahead, the first Skaven warriors were already trying to flee. Storm vermin shoved aside weaker rats, screeching in desperation, their discipline vanishing in the face of certain doom. The rat ogres, too large to escape quickly, bellowed in confusion as massive chunks of stone rained down upon them, crushing them instantly. And at the center of it all, Clorlord Vrichnotl stood motionless, watching the chaos unfold. For a single moment, Hagen swore he locked eyes with the warlord through the dust and falling rubble. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. One of them would not leave this place. Hagen pulled the final lever. The machine screamed. A final blast of energy pulsed through the temple, and with a deafening boom, the tunnels began to collapse. Run or die. Move, Hagen roared. The villagers sprinted through the crumbling corridors, dodging falling debris, leaping over cracks in the stone, their lungs burning as dust filled the air. Behind them, the Skaven fought amongst themselves, clawing and biting to reach the exit, their desperate screeches lost beneath the deafening roar of the collapsing tunnels. Hagen felt the ground shift beneath him, the void opening where stone once was. He didn't slow down. There was only forward. Only survival. The Under-Empire was falling apart, and if they didn't reach the exit now, they were going down with it. Chapter 28. Sreek's Fate. The Under-Empire was dying. The tunnels shook violently, entire sections crumbling into the abyss, the very air thick with the screams of the damned. Dust choked the passageways, Skaven squealing in terror as they fought, not to win, but to survive. And in the midst of the chaos, wounded and discarded, Sreek Vilefang crawled. His body was broken, his fur matted with blood, his once sharp claws dull with weakness. He had spent his entire life in the shadows, unseen, unheard, always the hunter. Now he was nothing. No weapons, no allies, no purpose. Just another dying rat in the dark. The forgotten one. Sreek's breath rattled in his chest, his tail dragging uselessly behind him as he pulled himself forward, inch by agonizing inch. He had to get out. Had to survive. He was Sreek Vilefang. He was Clan Eshin. He was meant to live. But no one had come for him. The storm vermin had left him behind. Clawlord Vrich had discarded him like filth. The humans had wounded him, beaten him, taken everything. And now even the tunnels themselves rejected him. The once proud assassin collapsed beside a pile of corpses, his claws scraping weakly against the stone. His red eyes blinked, struggling to stay open. Maybe he could still... A low chittering echoed in the darkness ahead. Sreek's ears twitched. His whiskers trembled. No, not like this. The feast of the damned. From the gloom, Skaven eyes glowed. Not storm vermin, not warriors. Lesser ones. A horde of starving rats. Skaven slaves, once his lessers, once beneath him, now crawled toward him on all fours, their fangs bared, their tails whipping hungrily. Sreek snarled weakly, baring his own teeth. "No, no, I am Eshin. You do not harm me." They did not listen. Because they were hungry, and he was weak. Sreek tried to crawl away, but the first pair of claws latched onto his leg. He kicked, hissing, but another latched onto his arm, another onto his shoulder. His screech of rage turned to panic as dozens of starving mouths sank into his flesh, tearing, ripping, his own kind devouring him alive. The end of Sreek Vilefang. He thrashed violently, but there was nowhere to go, only the endless swarm of teeth and hunger, his body dragged down into the writhing mass. His claws scraped at the stone, his red eyes wide with terror as he screeched one final plea. "No! No! No! I am one of you! I am—" His words were cut off by teeth in his throat, by claws tearing open his belly, by the thing he had always feared most, becoming prey. As the tunnels collapsed around them, as the Under-Empire crumbled, Sreek Vilefang, once a hunter, once a master of shadows, was reduced to nothing more than a meal for the desperate. And then, at last, he was silent. Chapter 29. Escape into the sunlight. The world roared behind them. The sound of collapsing stone, screaming Skaven, and the ancient dwarven machine grinding into oblivion filled the tunnels as the last survivors ran for their lives. Dust and debris rained from above, choking the air, turning everything into a blinding storm of darkness and ruin. Hagen didn't dare look back. There was no time, no second chances. Either they reached the exit now, or they died buried with the Under-Empire. The final steps. Father Albrecht stumbled ahead, coughing violently, his once pristine robes now torn and caked in grime. Margarita dragged a wounded villager, her face streaked with sweat and soot, her breath ragged but determined. The tunnel ahead began to slope upward, the air growing fresher, the scent of rot and filth finally thinning. Then, a pinprick of light. A glow, faint and distant but unmistakable. Hagen's heart slammed against his ribs. "There," he barked. "Go! Move!" The villagers surged forward, their exhausted bodies fueled by desperation. The light grew. The tunnel widened. And then, they broke through? Sunlight and ash. The survivors staggered out, gasping, blinded by the sudden light of day. For a moment they simply stood there, uncomprehending, unable to process that they had made it, that they were alive. The sky was a dull, sickly gray, the sun barely visible behind a thick shroud of mist, but compared to the hell below, it felt blindingly bright. Hagen fell to his knees, his hands digging into the cold, damp earth. Not stone, not Skaven tunnels. Real, living soil. The villagers collapsed around him, some weeping, some simply staring at the sky, too drained to even react. For the first time in what felt like eternity, they could breathe. But relief was short-lived, because they were not safe. Not yet. The cursed land. Father Albrecht was the first to rise, his expression darkening as he took in their surroundings. What should have been a vibrant, sunlit clearing was instead a landscape of twisted trees and withered earth. The air was wrong. Too cold. Too still. A place where life struggled to cling on, where the very land itself seemed poisoned. Hagen followed the priest's gaze and felt his stomach drop. They had escaped the Under-Empire, but they had emerged in Sylvania, the land of shadows and the dead. A place where survivors did not last long. Margarita exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. "Sigmar, help us." Because their nightmare wasn't over. It had only changed its shape. Chapter 30. The Shadows Remain. The wind howled through the twisted branches of Sylvania's haunted forests, a whispering breath that carried no warmth, no comfort, only the cold touch of unseen things. Hagen trudged forward, his body numb with exhaustion, his limbs aching, his mind fractured by the horrors of the Under-Empire. The survivors followed, silent, their faces gaunt and hollow, their eyes haunted. They had escaped, but the Under-Empire had not left them. It was still with them, in the dark spaces of their minds, in the shadows that twitched at the edges of their vision, in the way their breath hitched at the slightest sound. They had seen what no man was meant to see. They had fought the monsters in the dark, and they knew the truth, the lie that keeps the empires safe. Father Albrecht walked beside Hagen, his robes still filthy and torn, but his grip on his hammer was steady. "We must reach the town," the priest murmured, his voice low, cautious. "Once there, we can seek shelter. Aid." Hagen said nothing. He barely heard him. The town? Shelter? Food? None of it mattered. Because he knew, and that knowledge was a curse. He had spent his entire life believing what every good citizen of the Empire was taught. The Skaven do not exist. They were legends, fabrications, fairy tales, a superstition whispered by fools and madmen. But Hagen had seen them. He had fought them. He had killed them. And no one would believe him. The Empire refused the truth. Because to acknowledge it, to admit that the Skaven lurked beneath their cities, gnawing at the foundations of their world, would mean accepting that they had already lost. Hagen clenched his jaw, staring at the distant town on the horizon, its rooftops barely visible through the thick Sylvanian mist. They would call him a liar, a madman, a drunk. They would dismiss his words with laughs and pitying glances. But the truth was still there, because he had seen the red eyes in the dark, and he could feel them watching him still. The shadows never leave. A branch snapped in the distance. Hagen's hand shot to his bow, his heart hammering in his chest. The others froze. Father Albrecht gripped his hammer. Margarita held her breath. Silence. Nothing. Only the wind. Only the forest. Only the watching dark. Hagen exhaled slowly, lowering his bow. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe. But as they limped toward civilization, toward safety, toward a life that could never be normal again, something shifted in the trees. A flicker of movement. A glint of red eyes. A whispering chitter carried by the wind. And Hagen knew. The Skaven were still out there. Watching. Wait. Because the shadows never truly leave. And the Under Empire never forgets.